Have you ever felt judged by the cover and not the book? What happens when a moment of casual cruelty, a sneer based on a prejudice, unravels not just someone's day, but their entire career? This isn't a fairy tale. This is the story of two 16-year-old twins, Jordan and Jaden, who were pulled aside at airport security for looking out of place in first class. The officers laughed at their passports, mocking their names and their story. What they didn't know was that the boy's mother wasn't just any passenger. She was Isabella Sterling. And she didn't just fly on Sterling Airlines. She owned it. This is the story of how a power trip turned into a career-ending nightmare. The air in John F. Kennedy International Airport's Terminal 8 hummed with a unique kind of energy, a symphony of rolling suitcases, multilingual announcements, and the low thrum of anticipation. For 16-year-old twins Jordan and Jaden Carter Sterling, it was the sound of freedom. Fresh off their sophomore year finals, this trip to London was their mother's graduation gift, a rite of passage, and their first ever solo international flight. Jordan the elder, by 7 minutes, exuded a confident energy. He adjusted the strap of his designer backpack, his eyes scanning the massive departure board with the practiced ease of a seasoned traveler. He was dressed in a comfortable but stylish tracksuit, the kind of attire that spoke of effortless cool. He was the protector, the speaker, the one who navigated the world with his chin held high. Jaden was his mirror image in appearance, but his opposite in demeanor. He was quieter, his observant eyes taking in the details. Jordan often missed the way a stressed father juggled a toddler and 2 carry-ons, the intricate patterns on the floor, the weary look on the face of a barista. He had a sketchbook in his hands, its pages filled with charcoal drawings of cityscapes and portraits. While Jordan was ready to conquer London, Jaden was ready to capture it. Flight SA-001 to Heathrow, Gate 42. On time, Jordan announced, pointing at the board. First class, baby. Mum really hooked it up. She always does. Jaden murmured, a soft smile on his face. He felt a familiar mix of gratitude and a slight sense of unease. Their mother, Isabella Sterling, was a force of nature. A self-made woman who had built Sterling Airlines from a single chartered jet into a premier transatlantic carrier. She had given them everything. But she had also instilled in them a profound sense of humility, constantly reminding them that their last name was a responsibility, not a shield. The world will judge you before you even speak, she'd often say. Make sure your character speaks louder than their prejudice. They joined the priority security line, their first-class tickets, acting as a pass. The line moved smoothly until they reached the front. The Transportation Security Administration officer, a man whose name tag read Davis, looked them up and down. His gaze lingered on their clothes, their new sneakers, their youthful faces. A flicker of something disbelief, or perhaps disdain, crossed his face. Passports and boarding passes. He said, his tone flat and bored. Jordan confidently handed them over. Officer Davis took the deep blue passports, flipping them open. He looked at the photo of Jordan, then at Jordan himself. He did the same for Jaden. Then his eyes fell on the name Jordan Carter Sterling and Jaden Carter Sterling. He let out a short, humorless chuckle. Sterling, huh? He said, not to them but to his colleague in the next lane. Cute. You two fans of the airline? Jordan's smile tightened. We're just flying on it. Right? Davis sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. He scanned their boarding passes, his eyebrows shooting up. First class, big spenders. Mummy and Daddy pay for these. The question was designed to belittle, to put them in their place. Jordan felt a hot flush of anger creep up his neck. He remembered his mother's words about character. He took a deep breath. "Our mother bought the tickets, yes. Is there a problem, sir?" The polite "sir" seemed to annoy Davis even more. He held their passports up to the light, angling them with exaggerated scrutiny. "Probably. These look a little new, fresh off the press." He tapped Jaden's passport picture. "You don't look like a sterling." Jaden shrank back slightly, his quiet nature making him a target for this kind of bullying. Jordan stepped forward, his protective instincts kicking in. "They're real passports issued by the US government. And that's our name. Can we please go through?" Officer Davis seemed to relish the confrontation. He leaned in, lowering his voice into a conspiratorial whisper that was loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Look, kid, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but these tickets are $5,000 apiece. You and your brother don't exactly fit the profile." The phrase hung in the air, ugly and charged. Fit the profile. It was a coded sentence they had been warned about their whole lives. It meant they were black young, and in a space some people felt they didn't belong. Before Jordan could retort, Davis waved over his supervisor, a paunchy, sour-faced man with a name tag that read Miller. "Miller, take a look at this," Davis said with a triumphant smirk. "Got a couple of kids here with brand-new passports, first-class tickets on Sterling, and the last name Sterling. Smells fishy to me." Officer Miller took the documents, his gaze sweeping over the twins with the same dismissive air as his subordinate. He didn't even try to hide his suspicion. He looked at them not as passengers, but as problems. "All right, you two." Miller grunted, his voice a low growl of authority. "Step out of the line. We're going to need to ask you a few more questions. Bring your bags." He pointed towards a sterile grey door marked Private Screening. The dream of London suddenly felt a million miles away. As they were led away, the twins could hear Officer Davis's parting shot to his colleague, a laugh laced with pure mockery. "Sterling Airlines. Yeah, right. And I own the airport." The private screening room was as cold and impersonal as a morgue. The walls were a sterile shade of grey. The floor was scuffed linoleum, and the only furniture was a long metal table and a few uncomfortable plastic chairs. The air was thick with the silent residue of 1,000 other uncomfortable encounters. The door clicked shut behind them, sealing them off from the bustling terminal and plunging them into a bubble of unnerving silence. Officer Miller tossed their passports and boarding passes onto the metal table with a clatter that echoed in the small room. He circled the table like a shark while Officer Davis stood by the door, arms crossed, a smug look plastered on his face. "Empty your pockets." "Put everything on the table," Miller commanded, his voice devoid of any courtesy. Jordan and Jaden complied, placing their phones, wallets, and a few loose items onto the cold surface. Miller picked up Jordan's phone, a brand-new iPhone. "Nice phone. How'd you afford this?" "I worked for it," Jordan said, his voice tight. He had spent an entire summer interning in his mother's marketing department to buy it. "Right." "Worked," Miller scoffed. He then turned his attention to their wallets. He pulled out Jordan's school ID from the prestigious Dalton School. "Dalton. Huh. Scholarship kid." "No," Jordan said through gritted teeth. "We pay tuition." "We," Miller smirked. "You mean your parents? What do they do?" "Let me guess. Sports music." The stereotype was so blatant, so lazy, it was almost laughable. But in this grey room, under the weight of their accusatory glares, it wasn't funny. It was suffocating. "My father is a cardiologist," Jaden spoke up, his voice barely a whisper. "And our mother is in the airline industry." He chose his words carefully, avoiding the full truth, not wanting to escalate the situation. "The airline industry," Davis chimed in from the door, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "So she's a flight attendant. Is that how you got the buddy passes for these seats?" "There's nothing wrong with being a flight attendant." Jordan snapped, his patience wearing dangerously thin. "But no, that's not what she does." Miller ignored him instead, focusing on their last name. "So Carter Sterling. Hyphenated. Real fancy. Who's Sterling?" "The rich dad who pays for everything." "It's our mother's name," Jaden clarified softly. Miller let out a guttural laugh. "Oh, I get it. She gave you her name so you could try and pull stunts like this. Fly on Sterling Airlines with a matching last name. Hope no one asks any questions if the credit card used to buy the tickets gets flagged as stolen." This was their theory. The accusation was finally out in the open. They believed the twins were frauds, using stolen identities or a stolen credit card to fund a lavish trip. Every piece of their identity, their clothes, their school, their names, their very presence in the first-class line was being used as evidence against them. "You can call the credit card company," Jordan offered, his voice shaking with a mixture of anger and frustration. "You can call our mother. Her number is in my phone. You'll see the tickets were bought legitimately." "Oh, I'm sure we will," Miller said, patting the phone on the table. "But we're not there yet. First, we're going to search your bags. Thoroughly." For the next 20 minutes, the two officers systematically dismantled the boys' luggage. They unzipped every pocket, unfolded every piece of clothing, and laid their personal belongings out on the table. Jaden watched in horror as Davis callously flipped through his sketchbook, laughing at a portrait he'd been working on of his grandfather. "Look at this Miller." "The kid's an artiste," Davis jeered. Miller picked up a framed photo from Jordan's bag. It was a picture of the four of them, the twins, their mother and their father, Dr. Marcus Carter, standing on a beach, smiling. Isabella Sterling stood in the center, a beacon of strength and elegance, her arm wrapped around her son's. Miller stared at the photo. He looked at Isabella, then back at the boys. For a fleeting second, a flicker of doubt seemed to cross his mind, but it was quickly extinguished by his own ingrained prejudice. "This your mom?" he asked, tapping the glass. "Yes," Jordan said. "She's a very beautiful woman." Miller said, his tone oily and suggestive. "I'm sure she does very well for herself in the airline industry." The insinuation was vile. It was a line crossed a deep and personal insult that went beyond a simple security check. Jordan saw red. He clenched his fists, every muscle in his body tensing. He was about to lunge, to shout, to do something he knew he would regret, but he felt Jaden's hand on his arm. "Don't," Jaden whispered, his eyes pleading. "It's what they want." Jordan took a ragged breath, forcing himself to unclench his fists. Jaden was right. This was a power play. They wanted a reaction, a reason to escalate this further, a justification for their harassment. Finally, after finding nothing, no drugs, no weapons, no evidence of any crime, Miller seemed to deflate. His grand bust had turned into a waste of time, but he was not about to admit he was wrong. "All right," he grumbled, gesturing to the mess on the table. "Pack your stuff up. I'm letting you go with a warning." "A warning?" Jordan's voice was incredulous. "A warning for what?" "For buying a plane ticket. For drawing attention to yourselves." Miller shot back, his face hardening. "Next time, try to look like you belong. Maybe fly, coach. It's more your speed. He slid their passports and boarding passes across the table, his final act of dismissal. He and Davis walked out of the room without another word, leaving the twins, standing amidst the violation of their privacy, their belongings, strewn across the table, their dignity in tatters. They packed in silence, the weight of the humiliation pressing down on them. The excitement for their trip had evaporated, replaced by a cold, sickening anger. As they walked out of the grey room and back into the bright, indifferent terminal, the world felt different. His mother's words echoed in Jordan's head once more. Make sure your character speaks louder than their prejudice. He had tried. They both had. But their character had been irrelevant. In that room, they were not Jordan and Jaden Carter Sterling, sons of a doctor and a CEO. They were just two black kids who didn't fit the profile. And Jordan knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that this was not over. The Sterling Airlines Celestial Lounge was an oasis of calm amidst the chaos of JFK. It was a world away from the sterile grey room they had just left. Here the lighting was soft, the chairs were plush leather, and the air smelled faintly of expensive coffee and baked goods. A quiet murmur of conversation replaced the cacophony of the main terminal. In any other circumstance, it would have been a haven. Today, it felt like a gilded cage. Jordan and Jaden found a secluded corner overlooking the tarmac. Jaden sank into an armchair, pulling his knees to his chest, his face pale and withdrawn. He opened his sketchbook, but his hands were too unsteady to draw. The callous laughter of Officer Davis, as he'd flipped through his private drawings, echoed in his mind. Jordan, however, was vibrating with a furious energy. He paced back and forth, replaying the entire encounter in his head. The sneer on Davis's face, the condescending questions, Miller's disgusting insinuation about their mother. It was a venom that had seeped under his skin, and he couldn't sit still. I can't believe them. Jordan seethed his voice, a low, angry whisper. A warning. Try to look like you belong. Who the hell do they think they are? Jaden didn't answer. He just stared out the window at a massive Sterling Airlines 787 Dreamliner being prepped for departure. Its silver and navy blue livery gleaming under the afternoon sun. Their plane. It felt tainted now. Are you okay? Jordan asked. His anger momentarily replaced by concern for his brother. Jaden shook his head. They took everything apart. They laughed at my drawings. They looked at us like we were criminals, Jordan. Like we were nothing. Seeing his brother so defeated was the final straw. The humiliation had been bad enough, but seeing the hurt in Jaden's eyes ignited a resolve in Jordan that was cold and hard as steel. Humility and character were important, but so was justice. His mother had taught them that too. She had never, ever backed down from a fight when she was in the right. He stopped pacing and pulled out his phone. He scrolled to his favorites and pressed the top contact, Mom. It rang twice before she picked up. Her voice was warm and professional, the sound of a CEO in the middle of a busy day. Jordan, sweetheart. Are you boys at the gate? Is everything okay? Jordan took a deep breath, trying to keep his voice steady. Hey, Mom. Yeah, we're in the lounge. But something happened at security. Isabella's tone shifted instantly. The CEO vanished, and the mother emerged. A laser-like focus entered her voice. What happened? Are you hurt? No, we're not hurt, just angry and shaken up. He proceeded to recount the entire story. his voice gaining strength as he detailed every demeaning question, every snide remark from Officer Davis's initial sneer about their last name to Officer Miller's final insulting piece of advice. He told her about the room, the search, the way they'd been treated not as passengers, but as suspects. He made sure to include their names, Davis and Miller. He left out the worst part, the oily comment about his mother, to spare her, but she was too perceptive. She could hear the tremor of rage in his voice that he was trying to suppress. On the other end of the line in her sprawling corner office overlooking the Dallas-Fort Worth airport, Isabella Sterling sat perfectly still. As she listened, her face, usually warm and expressive, hardened into a mask of cold fury. The pen in her hand lay forgotten on her desk. Her knuckles were white where she gripped her phone. When Jordan finished, there was a beat of pure, chilling silence. It wasn't the silence of shock or sadness. It was the silence of a storm gathering force just over the horizon. "Jordan," she said, her voice dangerously calm. "Give me their names again. Officer Davis and Officer Miller. TSA at Terminal 8. "Okay," she said, her voice like ice. "Okay, I want you and Jaden to stay exactly where you are, in the lounge. Don't go to the gate. Don't speak to anyone else about this. Just stay put. Order whatever you want. I am handling this." "Do you understand, Mom?" "What are you going to do?" Jordan asked. The sheer controlled power in her voice was almost frightening. "I'm going to remind some people what the name Sterling actually means," she said. "I love you both. I will see you soon. See us soon. But you're in Dallas, and our flight is in an hour." "Don't worry about the flight," Isabella said, a new steely edge to her voice. "Flight SA-001 is not going anywhere until I say so. Now stay put." The line went dead. Jordan stared at his phone, a sense of awe mixing with his anger. He knew his mother was powerful. He had seen her command boardrooms and negotiate multi-million-dollar deals, but he had never been on the receiving end of her protective fury. He had just lit a fuse, and he had a feeling the explosion was going to be spectacular. He sat down opposite Jaden. "Mom's handling it." Jaden looked up, a flicker of hope in his eyes. "What does that mean?" Jordan looked out the window at the plane, their supposed chariot to London, now sitting idle on the tarmac. "I think it means," Jordan said with a slow, dawning grin, "that class is about to be in session." Robert Walsh, director of Terminal 8 operations at JFK, was having a relatively good day. The summer travel rush was in full swing, but things were running smoothly. Delays were minimal. Security lines were moving, and the air was filled with the controlled chaos he had come to love. He was in his office, overlooking the main concourse, sipping a lukewarm coffee and reviewing staffing schedules. His desk phone rang with a special tone, a high-priority line reserved for airline executives and federal officials. He picked it up. "Walsh here. Mr. Walsh, please hold for Isabella Sterling." Robert sat up a little straighter, his coffee forgotten. Isabella Sterling, the founder and CEO of Sterling Airlines, one of their most important and prestigious partners. He had met her a few times at industry events. She was brilliant, formidable, and known for her meticulous attention to detail. A direct call from her was unusual. It was almost always a harbinger of a significant problem. "Robert," her voice came on the line, and it was nothing like the charming, warm tone he remembered. It was arctic. "I have a situation. Ms. Sterling, of course. How can I help?" he said, already pulling up Sterling's flight manifest on his computer. "Your TSA supervisor, a man named Miller, and one of his officers, Davis, have just illegally detained and harassed my children in one of your private screening rooms." Robert's blood ran cold. He felt a bead of sweat trickle down his temple. This was the call every airport executive dreads. Not just a passenger complaint, but a complaint from a titan of the industry about her own children. I'm terribly sorry to hear that, Miss Sterling. Can you give me the details? He stammered, fumbling for a notepad. I don't have time to give you the details, Robert, because I am currently on my way to your airport. My jet will be on the ground at the private hangar in 45 minutes. The casual mention of a private jet was not a boast. It was a statement of intent. What I need from you is the following. 1. I want. Officers. Miller and Davis immediately removed from their posts and brought to the main TSA office near security checkpoint B. They are not to have contact with any other passengers. 2. I want you to secure all CCTV footage from checkpoint B and the hallway leading to the private screening rooms for the last hour. 3. I want you the highest-ranking TSA official on site and the head of Port Authority for this terminal to meet me there. It wasn't a request. It was a list of commands. And Robert. She added her voice, dropping to a level that was even more terrifying in its quiet intensity. Do not let my flight SA001 to Heathrow push back from the gate. That plane goes when I say it goes. Am I clear? Crystal. Clear. Is Sterling. Robert said, his heart pounding. I'm on it right now. The line disconnected. Robert stared at the phone for a second, the full weight of the situation crashing down on him. A CEO of a major airline was flying in on her private jet to personally handle a complaint. She was holding an international flight, costing her own company tens of thousands of dollars per minute in potential delays to make a point. This wasn't just a complaint. This was a declaration of war. He slammed his hand on the intercom button on his desk. Jennifer, cancel my next 3 meetings. Get me Christopher Vance, the TSA Federal Security Director for JFK on the line. Now. And find out who the Port Authority shift commander is and tell them to meet me at the Terminal 8 TSA Command Center in 10 minutes. It's a code red. He grabbed his jacket and practically ran out of his office. As he speed-walked through the terminal, his phone buzzed with calls. He barked orders, his mind racing. He had to get ahead of this. He had to contain the fallout. He made his way to the TSA Command Center, a restricted area behind the security checkpoints. He found Christopher Vance, a stern-looking man in a crisp suit already there, his face grim. Chris, you got the call, Robert asked. From my regional director, who got a call from someone very high up at Homeland Security, who got a call from Isabella Sterling. Vance confirmed. A tremor from the top. What the hell happened out there? Robert. I have 2 names. Miller and Davis, Robert said. We need to pull them off the floor quietly. A junior TSA manager overheard them. Miller and Davis. They just came off a secondary screening, a couple of kids. They were bragging about it a few minutes ago in the break room. Said they caught some wannabe influencers trying to pass off fake tickets. Robert and Chris exchanged a look of pure horror. Bragging. They had been bragging about harassing the children of one of the most powerful women in the aviation industry. Get them. Vance ordered the manager, his voice dangerously low. No scenes. Tell them I want to see them. Now. Meanwhile, back in the Celestial Lounge, Jordan and Jaden were oblivious to the storm they had unleashed. A lounge attendant had just delivered 2 complimentary plates of pasta and sodas to their table. "This is weird," Jaden said, poking at his food. "Mom said the flight was being held." "Look." He pointed out the window. The gate for flight SA-001 was still connected to the plane. The ground crew, who should have been scurrying to prepare for pushback, were standing around looking confused. Passengers at the gate were starting to look restless. She wasn't kidding. Jordan breathed a slow smile spreading across his face. He felt a thrill of anticipation. The bullies had picked a fight not knowing who they were truly fighting against. He took out his phone and sent a text to his mom. "Plane's still here. What's happening?" A reply came back almost instantly. A single ominous word: "Justice!" The arrival of Isabella Sterling at Terminal 8 was not announced with trumpets or a red carpet, but with a blunt, palpable shift in the atmosphere. A black Cadillac Escalade granted special tarmac access by a frantic Robert Walsh pulled up to a side entrance not used by the public. When the door opened, Isabella Sterling stepped out, and she was not dressed like a distraught mother. She wore a tailored navy blue power suit, her heels clicking with sharp authority on the concrete. Her face was a mask of glacial composure, but her eyes held a fire that could melt steel. Robert Walsh and Christopher Vance met her at the door, their expressions a mixture of apology and apprehension. Ms. Sterling Walsh began, his hands slightly trembling. "On behalf of the airport, I am so deeply sorry for what your sons experienced." Isabella held up a hand, cutting him off. "Save the apologies, Robert. They are meaningless until the problem is solved." "Where are they?" "The officers are in the TSA administrative office just past the checkpoint." Vance interjected, gesturing for her to follow. "We have also secured the CCTV footage you requested." "Good," she said, her voice sharp and clear. "Let's go." As they walked towards the security area, a bubble of silence seemed to move with them. Airport employees and TSA agents alike stopped what they were doing, their eyes drawn to this magnetic, furiously focused woman, flanked by 2 of the highest-ranking officials in the terminal. The message was clear. Something monumental was happening. They arrived at the administrative office. Through the glass window, Isabella could see them. Officer Miller was leaning back in a chair, looking bored and annoyed, while Officer Davis paced nervously. They clearly had no idea what was about to happen. They likely assumed this was a minor procedural issue. Isabella paused outside the door and turned to Vance. "I want to go in alone first." "Ms. Sterling, I'm not sure that's standard procedure," Vance started. "Christopher," she said, her voice dropping, and for the first time, she used his first name. It made the command even more potent. "This is no longer about standard procedure. This is about a deep systemic rot in your organization that manifested itself today on my children. I will handle this my way. You and Mr. Walsh will be witnesses." Vance swallowed hard and nodded, stepping back. Isabella pushed the door open and entered. The 2 officers looked up. They saw a well-dressed, powerful-looking black woman, but the context was missing. They didn't recognize her. "Can we help you, ma'am?" Miller asked, his tone impatient, still seeped in the arrogance of his perceived authority. "This is a restricted area." Isabella didn't answer immediately. She let the silence hang in the air, her piercing gaze moving from Miller to Davis, dissecting them, weighing them. Davis had the decency to look uncomfortable, but Miller just stared back, defiant. "I was told I could find an Officer Miller and an Officer Davis here," she said, her voice calm and even. I'm here about an incident that occurred approximately 1 hour ago. An incident involving 2 16-year-old boys. Miller's face hardened. Look, if you're their mother, you should know we were just doing our job. Your boys were trying to use tickets they clearly couldn't afford with suspicious-looking passports. We did what we had to do to ensure the safety of our airport. He crossed his arms, a posture of smug self-righteousness. Your job, Isabella repeated, taking a step closer. The temperature in the room seemed to drop by 10 degrees. Tell me, Officer Miller, is it part of your job to make assumptions based on a passenger's race and age? Is it in the TSA manual to mock a person's name? Is it standard procedure to make lewd, suggestive comments about a passenger's mother? Miller's smug expression faltered. Davis, meanwhile, had gone pale. He remembered every word they had said. I don't know what you're talking about, Miller blustered, but his voice lacked conviction. Oh, I think you do. Isabella continued, her voice never rising yet, gaining in intensity. You saw 2 young black men in first class, and your poisoned, prejudiced mind leaped to the most offensive conclusion possible. You didn't see passengers. You saw a profile. You saw a crime where there was none. You abused your authority to humiliate 2 children, and you enjoyed it. I'm told you were even bragging about it. She took another step, standing directly in front of his desk. You picked on those boys because you thought they were powerless. You thought they were just 2 kids with no one to stand up for them. You made a calculation. And you were wrong. Miller, desperate to regain control, finally stood up, puffing out his chest. Listen, lady, I don't know who you think you are, but you can't just come in here and, who I am? Isabella interrupted, her voice a whip crack. That's the question you should have asked yourself an hour ago. You held my son's passports in your hand. You laughed at their name. Sterling. She let the name hang in the air. She watched the dawning horror spread across their faces as the final terrible puzzle piece clicked into place. Davis looked like he was going to be physically sick. Miller's jaw went slack, the color draining from his face. They were staring at the woman from the photograph in Jordan's bag. My name, she said, her voice dropping to a lethal whisper, is Isabella Sterling. I am the founder and CEO of Sterling Airlines. Those tickets you assumed were stolen, I bought them. That name you mocked, it's mine. You weren't just harassing 2 passengers, gentlemen. You were harassing the owners of the very airline you were supposedly protecting. She turned her head slightly towards the door. Mr. Vance, Mr. Walsh. You can come in now. The 2 executives entered, their faces grim. Miller and Davis looked at them, then back at Isabella, and in that moment, they understood. This wasn't an angry mother filing a complaint. This was their executioner. Officer Miller. Officer Davis. Chris Vance said, his voice ringing with official finality. You are suspended effective immediately. Please hand over your badges and credentials. You will be escorted from the premises. A full internal investigation is being launched, and I assure you, Ms. Sterling, it will be swift and it will be thorough. Davis fumbled with his badge, his hands shaking so badly he could barely unclip it. Miller, however, just stared at Isabella, his face a mask of disbelief and ruin. He had picked a fight with a giant, and he was about to be crushed. Isabella watched, her expression unyielding as they were stripped of their authority. Her gaze was not triumphant. It was the cold, hard stare of justice being served. The laughter had stopped. The mockery was over. The grey room had claimed its final victims. The removal of Officers Miller and Davis was a quiet, pathetic affair. There was no shouting, no dramatic scene, Just two men stripped of their uniforms and their authority being led through the back corridors of the airport like ghosts. Their colleagues averted their eyes, whispering amongst themselves. The story was already spreading like wildfire through the terminal staff. 2 TSA agents had messed with Isabella Sterling's kids. The lesson was brutal and clear. In the administrative office, a profound silence remained. Robert Walsh was profusely apologizing again, promising reforms reviews, and anything else he could think of. Chris Vance was on the phone with his superiors, the conversation grim and filled with phrases like unacceptable breach and zero tolerance. Isabella listened, her focus absolute. She wasn't interested in hollow promises. She was interested in action. Christopher, the investigation is a given. What I want to know is what you are going to do to ensure this never happens to anyone else. My sons had me. Who does the average person have when one of your officers decides to abuse their power? Vance had no immediate answer. The question hung in the air, an indictment of the entire system. We will be implementing a full review of our secondary screening protocols and enhancing our anti-bias training, he finally managed. I will personally oversee it. I expect a full report on my desk within a month, Isabella stated. It was not a request. She then turned to Walsh. Robert, find my sons. Tell them I'm on my way to the lounge. Leaving the 2 executives to manage the disaster, Isabella walked back towards the main terminal. The mask of the CEO began to recede, replaced by the softer lines of a mother. Her steps, which had been so sharp and purposeful, were now just the steps of a parent hurrying to her children. She entered the celestial lounge. The quiet opulence that had felt so alienating to the twins now seemed to serve as a protective cocoon. She saw them immediately tucked away in their corner. Jaden was still withdrawn, staring blankly out the window. Jordan was on his feet, his posture tense, his eyes fixed on the entrance, waiting for her. The moment he saw her, the tension in his shoulders eased. She strode towards them, her arms open. Jordan met her halfway, wrapping her in a fierce hug. Mum. He breathed into her shoulder a world of relief and gratitude in that single word. She held him tight, then moved to Jaden, who had stood up slowly. She enveloped him in her arms, stroking his hair. He buried his face in her suit jacket, and she felt a slight tremor run through him. It's okay now, she murmured, her voice soft and soothing. It's over. I'm here. She sat with them, holding their hands for a long time. She didn't press them for details. She just let her presence be a source of comfort and strength. She saw the half-eaten plates of pasta and knew they hadn't had an appetite. They tried to make you feel small, she said, finally her gaze meeting both of theirs. They tried to make you feel like you didn't belong. I want you to listen to me very carefully. You belong in any room you choose to enter. Your presence is not a request. It's a statement. Never, ever let anyone's ignorance or hatred make you doubt your own worth. Do you understand? They both nodded, their eyes shining with emotion. What's going to happen to them? Jaden asked quietly. They will face the consequences of their actions, Isabella said simply. That is not your concern. Your concern is to remember the lesson, but not to carry the wound. We can't let people like that steal our joy. Just then her phone buzzed. It was the captain of flight SA-001. She answered. Yes, Captain Miller. No, not him, a different Miller. She said, a brief, ironic smile touching her lips. Yes, we're ready. Please begin boarding all passengers immediately. My family and I will be there shortly. And, Captain, apologize to the passengers for the delay. Tell them there was a... Security protocol review that needed my personal attention. She hung up and looked at her sons. Well, London is waiting. As they walked from the lounge to the gate, the atmosphere was entirely different. The gate agents, who had likely heard the story, greeted them with an almost reverential respect. As they boarded the plane and were shown to their first-class pods, the flight attendants addressed them with impeccable courtesy. Settled into her seat, Isabella looked over at her boys. Jaden had already taken out his sketchbook and was beginning to draw his expression focused and calm. The healing had begun. Jordan was looking out the window, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Mum," he said, turning to her. "Thank you." "I will always fight for you," she replied, her voice filled with a fierce, unwavering love. Always. As the massive Dreamliner finally pushed back from the gate and thundered down the runway. Lifting off into the sky, it felt like more than just the beginning of a vacation. It felt like they were rising above the ugliness, leaving the grey room and the men who inhabited it far, far below. The delay had been costly, the emotional toll significant, but a powerful message had been sent not just to 2 disgraced officers, but to an entire system. And it had been delivered personally by Isabella Sterling. While London offered a vibrant tapestry of history and art to distract them, the grey room at JFK had left an indelible mark on Jordan and Jaden. It was a subtle shadow that followed them through the grand halls of the British Museum and along the sun-dappled banks of the Thames. The trip was a healing process, but it was also a period of profound recalibration. Their world was bigger now, its complexities and its ugliness laid bare in a way they had never before experienced. One afternoon, sitting on a bench in front of the National Gallery at Trafalgar Square, Jaden was sketching the roaring bronze lions, while Jordan watched the chaotic flow of tourists and red double-decker buses. "Do you think we did the right thing?" Jaden asked suddenly, his charcoal pencil hovering over the page. "Calling Mom, I mean. Causing all that trouble." Jordan turned, surprised by the question. "The right thing, Jay. They treated us like criminals. They humiliated us. They're the ones who caused the trouble. We just refused to be silent victims." "I know," Jaden said, looking down at his sketchbook. "But that guy Miller, he was so full of hate. I keep thinking about his face when Mom walked in. It was like his whole world just broke. And Davis, he just looked scared, like a kid. He wasn't a kid. He was a grown man with a badge and a disgusting sense of humor, Jordan countered, though with less fire than he would have had a week ago. The initial rage had cooled into something more contemplative. Look, what they did was wrong. Period. There have to be consequences. Mom always says that power without accountability is just tyranny. I guess Jaden conceded. I don't want to be the kind of person who enjoys watching someone else's world break, even if they deserve it. Jordan was silent for a moment, watching a flock of pigeons take flight. "I don't enjoy it," he said softly. "But I'm not going to feel sorry for them either. They built that world on a foundation of prejudice and cruelty. It was bound to collapse. We just happened to be the ones who pushed." They sat in a comfortable silence, the unspoken understanding passing between them. Their innocence had been chipped away, but in its place a new, more resilient wisdom was beginning to form. They were no longer just the sons of Isabella Sterling. They were young men who had stared into the face of systemic ugliness and had not backed down. Back in New York, the world of former TSA supervisor Frank Miller was not just broken, it was annihilated. He was summoned to a final meeting in the same sterile administrative building where he had once held court. This time he was not the one in charge. He sat opposite Christopher Vance, the TSA Federal Security Director, a man whose face was carved from granite. A thick file lay on the desk between them. Mr. Miller Vance began his voice devoid of any warmth. The investigation into the events of August 14th is complete. After reviewing the CCTV footage, the sworn affidavits from the Carter Sterling miners, and conducting a series of internal interviews, your employment with the Transportation Security Administration is terminated effective immediately. Miller, who had been simmering with a bitter, self-righteous anger for a week, finally erupted. Terminated. You're firing me over some spoiled brats who couldn't handle a routine security check. This is a disgrace. I was doing my job. Vance did not flinch. He opened the file. Was it your job, Mr. Miller, on March 12th of this year, to detain a Sikh man for over an hour, referring to his turban as that head thing? Was it your job on November the 2nd of last year to tell a family from Guatemala to learn to speak American when they were struggling to understand your instructions? He continued his voice, a relentless monotone, listing dates and incidents. Was it your job to dismiss the complaint of a black woman in 2022 who claimed you emptied her bag containing religious artifacts onto the floor and laughed? We have reopened 7 prior complaints against you, Frank. 7 instances where passengers felt demeaned, harassed, or racially profiled by you. 7 instances that were dismissed because it was their word against a veteran officer. But now we have a pattern. This incident with the Sterling boys wasn't an anomaly. It was the culmination of a career spent abusing your authority. Miller stared, his face ashen. These were ghosts, he thought, long-buried minor annoyances he had swatted away over the years. He never imagined they would come back to haunt him, resurrected and armed with the power of a billionaire. This is a witch hunt, he croaked, his voice a hoarse whisper. She's doing this. That woman, Miss Sterling, simply shined a light. Vance corrected him coldly. You created the darkness. Due to the findings of gross misconduct and civil rights violations, your law enforcement credentials are being permanently revoked. We are also forwarding this file to the department in charge of federal pensions. I wouldn't count on a comfortable retirement. That was the final blow. The pension, 20 years of his life erased. It wasn't just his job. It was his future, his identity. He had seen himself as a gatekeeper, a protector of the nation's security. But the truth was now undeniable. He had been nothing more than a petty bully, and his power had been a fragile illusion. He looked at Vance at the damning file and saw the smoking ruins of his life. He said nothing else. He simply signed the papers, a man already defeated, and walked out of the office a civilian, a nobody, haunted by the echo of his own derisive laughter. For James Davis, the days following his termination were a blur of shame and suffocating silence. He stayed in his small apartment, the blinds drawn, avoiding calls from friends and family. Miller's angry, blame-filled voicemails went unanswered. He couldn't face the world. He couldn't face himself. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the hurt and confusion on Jaden Carter Sterling's face as he'd mocked his sketchbook. He heard his own sarcastic voice dripping with a poison he hadn't even realized he possessed. He hadn't always been like this. He'd joined the TSA with a sense of purpose, but years of cynicism and proximity to Miller's casual bigotry had eroded him. He had learned to laugh at the jokes, to adopt the sneer, to see passengers not as people, but as potential threats or annoyances. He had become a reflection of his worst mentor. One evening, staring at his termination letter, the phrase "failure to uphold the code of conduct" burning in his mind, he knew he couldn't let this be the final word on his character. The guilt was a physical weight, and he had to do something to lift it even a little. He found a pen and a piece of paper. He started to write. It wasn't a letter of excuses. It was a confession. He wrote about his own insecurities, his misguided desire to fit in with the cynical culture of his workplace. He admitted with raw honesty that he had judged the twins on sight, that his questions and comments were born of a prejudice he was now ashamed to confront. "I didn't see two kids on their way to a vacation," he wrote, his hand shaking. "I saw a stereotype and I acted on it with cruelty. There is no excuse for my behavior. I did not treat you like human beings, and that is a failure I will have to live with for the rest of my life." He wasn't asking for a job back. He wasn't even asking for forgiveness. He was simply trying to put a small piece of accountability into a world he had helped fill with ugliness. He sealed the envelope, addressed it to Jordan and Jaden Carter Sterling, care of the Sterling Airlines headquarters, and mailed it feeling not relief, but the first painful step toward a reckoning. While these personal dramas unfolded, Isabella Sterling was moving with the strategic precision of a grandmaster. In her Dallas office, she convened a video conference with her top legal, peer, and operations executives. The incident at JFK was not epicrisis. She began, her voice cutting through the virtual meeting room. It was a gift. It was a diagnostic tool that revealed a cancer. Bias in airport security isn't just a moral failing. It is a business liability. It alienates our customers. It creates delays, and it exposes this company to risk. We are not just going to complain about it. We are going to fix it. For the next hour, she laid out her vision. It wasn't a donation or a press release. It was a fully fledged, privately funded initiative. We will call it the Carter Sterling Initiative. Carter for my sons who endured the harassment, and Sterling for the company that will ensure no other child has to. We will partner with civil rights leaders, sociologists, and law enforcement training experts to build a new curriculum from the ground up. It will be immersive, case study-based, and mandatory for all TSA personnel at every airport we designate as a Sterling hub. Our funding will be tied to performance and compliance metrics. We will turn our largest operational footprints into centers of excellence for passenger respect. It was a brilliant move, transforming a personal violation into a powerful brand-defining mission. She was taking control of the narrative, using her immense resources not just to punish the guilty, but to rebuild the system that had created them. A few weeks later, when her sons returned from London, a letter with a New York postmark was waiting for them. They read James Davis's words together in the quiet of their living room. When they finished, the silence was heavy with a different kind of emotion. "He sounds sorry," Jaden said, his voice barely a whisper. "Like actually sorry." "He is," Jordan agreed, his own anger softened by the raw vulnerability in the letter. He didn't make excuses. He just owned it. They took the letter to their mother. Isabella read it, her expression unreadable. She saw the careful penmanship, the tear stain that had slightly blurred a word on the second page. She saw not a monster, but a man who had stared into the abyss of his own character and had been horrified by the reflection. Her fight had never been about vengeance. It was about creating a world where her sons and all sons and daughters like them would not be judged by a profile. Frank Miller was a lost cause, a man consumed by his own bitterness. But James Davis? Perhaps he was not. The Carter-Sterling initiative launched to national acclaim. It was hailed as a revolutionary step in public-private partnership. And quietly behind the scenes, Isabella Sterling made one final executive decision. She instructed the initiative's director to create a single entry-level administrative position. The job would involve cataloging and analyzing passenger complaints and feedback for the new training program. And she suggested that if a young man named James Davis, who was now enrolled in sociology at Queensborough Community College, were to apply after completing his degree, he should be granted an interview. It was not a guarantee. It was not a pardon. It was merely a chance to spend a career cleaning up the very mess he had helped create. It was the most fitting and complex form of karma she could imagine. The debt would be paid not with punishment, but with purpose. The story of Jordan and Jaden isn't just about a dramatic airport confrontation. It's a powerful reminder that dignity and respect are not privileges reserved for a select few. It's about what happens when prejudice meets power, and how a mother's love can become a force for systemic change. Officers Miller and Davis made a choice based on ignorance, and the consequences were swift and life-altering. This is karma in its truest form, not just punishment, but a rebalancing of the scales. What do you think? Was Miller's fate deserved? Does Davis's apology earn him a chance at redemption? We all have a story about being misjudged. Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you believe that accountability is crucial and that everyone deserves to be treated with respect, hit that like button. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to the channel for more true stories of justice and karma. Your voice matters. Let's keep the conversation going.